Welcome to the Reproducibility Podcast, Season 2. This episode will be an introduction of the new hosts for this season, as well as a discussion about how science can be better and how we should rebuild to being better. Okay, so I'll start off introductions maybe. I'm William Ngiam. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist at the University of Chicago. Been a postdoc for a few years now. And I founded and organized the Reproducibility Journal Club at the University of Chicago, as well as serve on the steering committee, as well as doing some other things to try and advocate for open science and things like that. I'll throw it over to Sarah, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Sauvé. I'm a music scientist. I'm a postdoc at Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador in St. John's, Canada. I live and work on the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, and the island of Newfoundland is home to the unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Mi'kmaq. My institution also has a campus in what's now called Labrador, and that's the homelands of various Inuit and Innu peoples. I've been interested in open science for a while. I'm really excited to have been invited to be part of this core team. I'm really interested in critical theory, ways of doing science differently. What does that look like? What does feminist science look like? What does anti-colonial science look like? And so I'm interested to talk about these kinds of things in relation to open science. And on to Jan.
Really cool.
Yeah, hi. I'm Jan. I'm with Aalto University in Finland. I'm a cognitive psychologist working in HCI and human-computer interaction, studying the emotional experience, primarily the emotional experience of video games. And hopefully I'll be mostly the editor of this whole thing here.
Yay.
The podcast in general, this new rebooted thing that we're doing.
And you have a voice too, of course. So,
of course, yes.
So what spurred sort of the choice of topic for this episode was a blog post that I wrote, actually, called Science Needs to Be Better, Not Simply Return to Normal. So I'll share a little bit, I guess, about my thoughts going into that blog post. It's pretty self-explanatory from the title. I was writing it at a time where I was pretty upset with how academia was going, especially in light of the pandemic, where I had this overwhelming feeling from everything that I was doing to everything I was seeing and reading that it felt like we weren't really acknowledging the effects of the pandemic and all of the issues and problems that the pandemic had brought to light with our structures and our processes. And there was almost a willful ignorance that the pandemic had happened and we were just trying to get back to normal or trying to return to normal. And for me, returning to normal was just not good enough. It's simply just ignoring all of the problems that have been brought to light and all the issues that were there before. And we weren't doing anything to make things better. So hence the title, like, we shouldn't just simply return to normal. Science needs to be better, needs to be better for all of us. And that doesn't just mean for the scientists within the structures trying to do science, but also for those who consume the science or need it in their everyday lives, right? Through, for example, medical interventions and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's sort of my sort of thoughts behind that blog post.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we got here the way that things were before. If we go back to that, then we'll just be back to where we are again, right? Like we're going in circles. So like something does have to change.
Yeah, and I think to some extent, the pandemic didn't like the pandemic really hypercharged all the difference that were in our society in general, but in academia specifically. Like they were already there, and suddenly it became so much more obvious how fucked up some people have it.
Yeah, all the invisible labor became very visible suddenly. Right? And corporations, things like Amazon, worked very, very hard to try to hide that labor as quickly as possible. Everything moved online. Everything became invisible again. Everything was accessible. Just go home and isolate. There's going to be no problem. But who's working in the factories? Not the factories. Who's working in the warehouses?
Yeah.
Who's delivering? You know, all of these jobs still exist. Who's making the product that's still there? It's just hidden. So yeah, the pandemic revealed a lot of the exploitation that's going on, and revealed who is important, who has value, and who does not. What communities are allowed to suffer from COVID, and who is allowed to be protected. I actually also had decided when the pandemic started to leave academia. I've obviously now changed my mind. For now. Assuming I, get a job.
Fingers crossed, yeah.
But yeah, I decided to leave. All these things were becoming really obvious, and once I was allowed to pause from the grind, I was like, I don't want to drive myself into the ground doing all this work for this, for what? For maybe getting a job in the future where I'm going to just keep grinding? No, I want a social life. I want balance in my life. And academia right now just really isn't conducive to that. And that's a problem.
So what exactly made you take that decision? Was it that suddenly you had time to think about what you were doing, or what change caused that?
Yeah, it was partly that. It was suddenly everything was stopping, and I was like, I was working really hard towards something that was really uncertain, which isn't inherently, I guess, bad, but I wasn't really getting any response from the people that I was trying to work with. I was giving a lot more than I was receiving, and that was, to me, a problem. I want reciprocal relationships. I don't want one-sided things where I'm just giving and giving, because that just leads to burnout in the end. And that's also when I started reading more critical literature. I honestly cannot remember how I stumbled upon it. I was studying the Indigenous Canada course that's available online for free through Coursera by the University of Alberta. It's a great course. And from there, I also started doing the Yellowhead Institute's Abolition Guide. And somehow through that, I read something that got me into something else. And you know how reading lists just exponentially expand all the time. I happened upon all of this critique of academia that I'd never come across before. How, it's inherently imperial and heteropatriarchal and colonial. And it's wait, what? I'm doing all of this and hadn't really even thought about it before, because it just wasn't something that was taught. I did a music degree with a minor in psychology, so I certainly wasn't exposed to any of this. As far as I understand, psych undergrads aren't taught anything outside of positivism, right? And not. So I was just I feel like I've been lied to my whole life, and what is this? And I'm participating in this system that my politics have long been really against. So how do I how do I do that? How can I work in a system that is completely different from my politics? And I decided that I wasn't able to do that. So for a while I decided to leave, and then the pandemic continued. And my plan to go to a working holiday in New Zealand didn't pan out because I couldn't get in because COVID. And the more I read in critical literature, the more I saw that there are people out there doing things differently. And the more I became motivated to also do things differently, to know that it was possible, to know that there is potential support out there, that things are changing, and that I can be a part of that. So that's what made me also come back and give me hope to try again.
That's really motivating actually to hear. I often oscillate. There's the famous academic meme where it's the metronome, and it's vacillating between wanting to leave academia and loving academia and just going back and forth. And for me, the times where I'm back in is where I realized that I have an ability to sort of change the system and trying to create initiatives or create ways that we can make things better for us and try and change some of these structures that will reduce or hopefully eliminate some of the injustices that are happening in our system.
Can we talk about a specific example? We're talking about like systems in general and issues, but like let's maybe talk about one specific example so we can have something to like dig our teeth into.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on something that you mentioned, which was like non-reciprocal relationships in academia. And I think part of the motivation for me to write this blog post and why I was really unhappy and upset was that I wasn't receiving enough validation or rewards for the work that I was doing. And there's a great reckoning happening. I think this is true across a lot of postdocs and like early career researchers where they feel like they're doing a lot, but they're not really given things in return. So postdocs have been shown to provide a lot of the training and mentoring of the students in their lab. It's not necessarily from the PI. Postdocs are doing a lot of the grunt work and sort of managing the lab and, important things that aren't recognized, such as managing the culture of the lab, being in learning skills and being in touch with the skills and the current or most recent research. So
you can't see me like vigorously nodding my head at all this, but that's what's happening right now.
What do postdocs get in the end? Pretty paltry salary. I mean, in the US, it's banded by the NIH, which is ridiculous.
What does
you
that
don't really
mean?
get?
Sorry.
So the salaries in the United States are determined by the National Institutes of Health, and they have so it's equal across the entire nation. So there's no adjustment for cost of living, and these were started years ago. So they may have been reasonable when they were started, but they have not been adjusted for inflation or just anything. The increases are like, it's a joke. It's like maybe $1,000 per year, perhaps, if you're lucky. And it's graded. So starting at year 0, it's a little less than like year 7. Who wants to do a year 7 postdoc really? But
what is the floor? If you
it's
don't
like
mind
53,000 at the moment. I think when I started, it was around 48 to 50,000. Yeah, it's not affordable. I've been in situations where I feel like the lab
floor is 31.5.
Yeah, it's not
really
great
low.
nationally.
I make more than that because I'm in medicine, but like 31,500 is the floor at Memorial University for a postdoc. That is not a living wage.
Yes, exactly. It's not a living wage. People are putting in way more hours. If you calculate your hourly rate, it's probably way lower than you realize. So to bring it back, postdocs aren't rewarded with to their value with salary. They aren't really recognized with awards or any other things like that. It also doesn't count towards career advancement because you don't really get so currently the system is you get recognized by publications, right? So you won't get necessarily a citation or a publication from mentorship or from being in the lab doing this extracurricular stuff. And it's under the guise of training because you're called a trainee as a postdoc, and that's like they say, oh, that's the value you're gaining, when really that is work that you're putting in. Not you're not doing it for yourself. Yes, it's sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but you could see why I was upset and why I decided to put words to a page so that's sort of that's where I want to sort of couch this. I think reciprocal relationships is a really good way of thinking about this, because it is not reciprocated for a lot of people in many ways.
Yeah, it's a terrible culture. I saw recently on Facebook and Twitter that there's now internships that you have to pay per hour to be an intern.
Seriously?
For it. It's like, wait, what? What? Like, when did this flip? It's such an undervaluing of labor, of skill, and that comes from capitalism. That comes from the extraction of labor for capital.
Yeah. I was about to say, like 3 years ago, that was a sketch by a German comedian that they wanted to get an internship, and the people in the interview said, well, the last applicant said he would pay 30 euros an hour. What would you pay?
I mean, it's scary, but like, I feel like teaching assistants, like, graduate students who teach classes, that's basically what's happening. They're going into student debts, and they're asked to teach a course, and they're not really paid for it, at least in most United States universities. So that is effectively paying for an internship in a way, which is horrifying. It's closer than you think, right?
Yeah, and in North America, you're expected to teach, to apply for a tenure track position. So you have to have taught at some point. Mm-hmm. But you don't get paid well for that labor. It's ridiculous.
So at the risk of being the class trader here, so I kind of like doing stuff in an honorary position. Like, I'm on the Reproducibility Steering Committee. I'm not getting paid for this. I'm not getting paid for this podcast editing. There's a lot of things I am doing because I think it is important for science, for our community, for whatever. And I like doing that. And I would not want to be paid for that. Also for like the few opportunities where I was able to give talks to people. I like doing this. I don't want them to pay me. With the very big caveat that my supervisor or my position allows for me to do that while getting paid and living or being European, working in Europe. I get paid okay. I can start a family, but I'm not going hungry. So I am in that privileged position to do a lot of voluntary work. Mm-hmm. Like, my point being that we as scientists should get paid enough that we can do all this stuff for free, because we are not working for ourselves or for any singular entity, but for a community, right?
So
I don't know.
My gut reaction to that is we don't want to set a standard where we sacrifice like our livelihoods for this so-called freedom to take on initiatives. So the sort of the floor, as you said, the let's say salary floor must be higher to allow us to do this, and it shouldn't drop before. Like, we shouldn't be taking cuts from that to allow us to do that. But the probably more positive solution would be like, hopefully in future there are lines of work which you can have a livelihood doing the things that you like, such as these community initiatives such as reproducibility and informing open science communities across academia, or in editing a podcast that is disseminating science and the perspectives of early career researchers and bringing a spotlight to their voices.
Like this, I think this should be recognized as part of our work and valued as part of our existing work, and not something to do on top of all of the other stuff that we do.
Yes, exactly. I mean,
right? Like, I feel like it's part of the problem that I felt when I decided to leave was that it was like, okay, I have to be a researcher, but I'm also expected to do public engagement, and I'm also expected to do community outreach, and I'm also expected to teach, and I'm also expected, to do all of these things and be a grant writer and be an expert at everything. And I was like, I cannot be an expert at everything. It is not possible. And I was like, oh, well, now you have to learn Bayesian stats, and now you have to learn open science if you want to get a job, and now you have to, and it was like, okay, I'm bilingual and I like to teach stats. Those things should give me a job. They haven't. Now I'm adding public engagement and doing a lot of community stuff. Okay, that should get me a job. It doesn't. Okay, now I'm adding critical. It was like, what do I need? Where does it end? Like, how much do I need to show that, like, I am an expert at what I do and my labor has value? Like, it just seems like it's getting out of control.
I mean, I totally agree with all of that, right? My point was more that as an academic, you should be paid a living wage while having the freedom to engage with science and benefit a community as you see fit, right? And, all that what now runs as extracurricular stuff or stuff that you are supposed to do on your free time. It's not that bad at Aalto, but at other universities I heard it's like assumed that stuff like peer review, you're doing that in your off time. And like that shit can't fly. All of that stuff should be done in your working hours. Your working hours should be set. You should be able to go home and you should be able to live from that.
Mm-hmm.
Or, maybe even
Absolutely.
be able to have a family.
Yeah.
Like how many academics cannot even, start a family with what we get paid and just the
Plus
constant
the
threat.
divide.
Yes, and the constant threat of having to move, like completely uproot all the time.
Yeah. What you were saying earlier also made me think to ask, who are we accountable to as scientists? When we do our work, who are we accountable to?
In my opinion, I feel like science is a public good. So naturally, I think we're accountable to the public, especially because the public funds a lot of science through tax. So it seems like we're accountable to everyone, to put it sort of bluntly, in my opinion. You could argue for sort of varying levels of accountability, but at I think some core aspect, humankind almost is who we're accountable to. I mean, even beyond that, maybe. So
but then how do you hold yourself accountable to a group that's so general?
It's tough, right? Like, I don't think I have the answers.
I've been thinking about that a lot, honestly. Like, who am I accountable to and who do we do our work for? And it's something that I've been thinking and writing about. And also this whole idea of universality and, like, that's a problem. I don't agree with it, but that could be a whole other podcast. So we'll leave that topic for another time.
Yeah. I didn't love what I was saying.
The difference between accountability to the funders, accountability to your participants, accountability towards your colleagues who are going to read your work. Like, all of those are different relationships of accountability. And they all require, I think, different things from us. And how we navigate that, I think, is an interesting question to try to figure out. I guess I want to say, on that journey. Right. I made a little graph of who I'm accountable to and what those relationships are like.
Oh, that's really cool. That seems like a really good exercise to take on.
And that's when I realized that, like, the only relationship where I give more than I get is to my institution. And I was like, I don't like that. I don't like that at all.
Right.
So now I've adjusted that and I give less as much as I can, right? Like, I do have certain responsibilities to my institution, that's fine, but I don't give more than I feel like I need to. But I do give now more to my lab mates, and I'm more generous. Like, I review more, so I'm shifting where my energies are going based on this analysis of the web of accountabilities that I'm a part of in those relationships.
Yeah, that sounds great to me. Like, taking stock of where you put your energy and where you put your resources seems like always a good exercise. And something that's been percolating in my mind is, like, I don't want to call it micro level change, but like sort of local changes feel way more important and impactful and way more accountable. Like a better place to be accountable at, rather than because this general universal thing, it's too overwhelming and you can't really make those connections and build those bridges. Whereas with more local places, like in your lab or in your own discipline, or these seem more manageable and more sort of tangible in terms of ways to be accountable and ways to be like to create better. Like, you don't want to discount changes in those systems, those small level systems, because they could be impactful and much more meaningful.
Yeah, I've just started reading Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Murray Brown, and I've only gotten through the first couple of chapters, but that's exactly what I feel so far the point of the book is. It's about small changes will grow into bigger change over time, but the focus is on relationships and building deep relationships more than, or instead of, a bunch of shallow relationships that are spread out. Make change at the local level.
I love that as a lot. I was also I was recently invited by the National Institutes of Health to this the name of it was Catalyzing Communities of Research Rigor workshop. Such a mouthful.
Ooh.
But they sort of led the initiative with a talk by Damon Centola, and his book is called Change. And there's a subline that I've forgotten, but he was doing network analyses and sort of showing that with complex behaviors, such as, for example, taking on open science principles, you sort of imagine it as a contagion where you start from the center and it ripples out. But the real way to sort of instantiate these changes is you need them to be at the peripheries and sort of have it normed in those local networks before they... So then when you see, when you get sort of a critical mass within a local network, that can then spread to other local networks because they see within the local network, you have this behavior normed, for example. So that's been really interesting. And that sort of was in line with my views that local change is important, even within institutions, within labs, even within dyads, like PI and mentor to the mentee. That's really important. That's really valuable, and ways to do that. Sorry to take a bit off the space here, but I think
absolutely, I agree.
This is a good way to couch. So the second idea that we're taking up, and a theme that came out of that same workshop that I attended, was this idea about evolution versus revolution. And so these words are heavily weighted, so let me try and explain a little bit more. Evolution is the idea that we have a system in place and we can sort of reform that system and change that system for it to be better, for science to be better. Or we need a revolution, which has this idea of you sort of tear it all down and we need to rebuild these structures from the ground up kind of idea. Naturally, these are sort of two extremes, and with most things, the true answer probably lies in the middle. But I think this is a good place to sort of think about that and continue our discussions in that vein. I don't know, Jan, if you had any thoughts about that.
I always have a lot of thoughts. I mean, you sadly I don't have a camera today, otherwise you would have seen me nodding through everything you said. I mean, it is super hard to argue for a revolution when it's so hard to see what is at the other end. I think in the end I would argue that a revolution would be better than, a slow evolution, because as we see at the moment, the open science movement already kind of encroaches on big publishers, but we see that they are not going away, but they are changing their tactics to dig their claws even deeper. Like Elsevier has gone full on surveillance capitalism at this point. There was recently a few blog posts popped up. If I try to find them and put them in the description when this is published, that kind of show that Elsevier kind of knows everything you're doing, from generating a research idea up to publishing your paper, depending on if your university pays for these and those services. Like, you're using Mendeley, they know exactly what you're reading. I think Scopus is
wild.
also there.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge the author of that. I think it was Eiko Fried.
Yes.
I think.
Yep.
Who did this analysis and like looked into the metadata that Mendeley pulls, and it's scary how much information that is clear that we've not consented to being collected and probably used and sold is being taken by Mendeley.
Technically you did consent, but
I mean, it's gray area there, but
no, it's just this web of terms of services that are, purposefully opaque. No, but yeah, my original point is like a revolution, like thinking about this, a revolution makes so much more sense. Just get rid of them. Disband them and instead do anything else. But what would that be, right?
I think that's what's exciting.
Yeah.
Like, I think, for me, from the abolition stuff that I've read, it's all about imagining future worlds, and you have to imagine it before it can happen. So let's imagine together, like, what do we want? What are different things that we could do? And instead of maybe having one thing that replaces the one thing, let's have like 100 different things that replace the one thing. Try different things, try different experiments, try and fail. It's okay to fail. That's another problem with academia. We could talk about that another time. Failure.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. So I like the point that Jan's making. So it feels like we need, like, what stood out to me was the pace of the change. Like, we really need something like abrupt almost. And that sort of is a calling of a revolution. We need the change now, immediate. With the big publishers, I've taken on an editor-in-chief role of a no-fee open access journal, with a not-for-profit publisher. And it's
nice.
The not-for-profit is by scientists. Yeah, it's by early career researchers. It's so tough. Like, I think people care, but no one's going to submit to our journal. I mean, if there's any listeners out there, the Journal for Reproducibility in Neuroscience, if you got a piece, let me know. But the idea is that, it's like, we're still stuck, right? We're still stuck in the system where we do care about prestige and we do want visibility and readership of our work. And it's hard to sort of break that with, a smaller journal, right? Even though we're probably providing better services in terms of reviews, in terms of, just publishing and formatting of the damn paper, because we're not reliant on paper formats. We're like, online, and it's archived. It just makes way more sense. It's way better.
So I recently had a discussion in my journal club. A fresh PhD student, he kind of realized he was at this crossroads where he could either go for really proper registered reports that then would usually be published at don't celebrate too early. Wait, where I'm going with this. Dear listeners, Will was enthusiastically shaking his fist.
Yes, I love registered reports. I think they are the future. But
they are
continue.
Absolutely awesome. But then those would be published in like smaller journals, because the most prestigious journals, especially in the field that he is in, still don't do registered reports.
They're so slow to update, aren't they?
Yes.
And they're the ones with the most resources and the most funds and the... Yes,
exactly. The alternative... So he argues that the alternative is he would be in the position to do some really good work and trying to get that out in Nature or Science. Arguing that, okay, he couldn't do the open science stuff that he really wants to do, i.e. registered reports, and all of that stuff, but he would be way more hireable, could move on into a position of power, and from there then establish the open science practices. And
I hear that so often, it bothers me so much, of like, oh, we're just gonna wait. we're just going to wait till we're in a position of power. We're going to wait. And it's like, right, but then how long?
How far has that taken us? Like,
yeah.
It's not like reform hasn't been around until the open science movement. There has been change and like, I get it. Like, you want to position security before you take on these challenges, but I have a point against it that I recently learned, and it comes back to the network structures I was talking about earlier, where we have to realize that hesitancy to adopt these behaviors is not a neutral action. So not doing anything is not you're not fence sitting. It's part of the resistance.
Yeah.
So this is, in terms of a network analysis, this is the idea. So if you think about what determines the uptake of these complex behaviors, such as a registered report. Well, it's not, if you have multiple connections, and like, as we all do, as we're very interconnected in this age, if you have a lot of non-adopters, you compare that to the single adopter, right? Let's say your ratio is 1 to 10. The weight of you taking on this behavior is going to be much more difficult, right? Because imagine if it was 9 out of 10 people who were doing registered reports around you. Now you feel like this behavior is normed, and you have a chance to adopt this behavior or take on this, like, the motivation to do it. So waiting and hesitating is actually a resistance to having this behavior spread and be normed throughout the network. So it's not like, hesitancy is not a neutral action. I do understand the idea that it's you want to wait for like security, and it would be easier to do it from a position of power. But I would argue, well, specifically in the case of registered reports, I think they're great for junior trainees. And I would argue they're probably, if you might have to take a bit of a hedge, a bit of a bet, a bit of a gamble, but
what part of science isn't a gamble?
True. But a registered report would look really good, I think, on the CV of a junior trainee. It signals that they care about the rigor of their research and, in touch with current science reforms. Likely the work is better because it's been reviewed at an earlier stage. Probably the pre-registration probably means they've thought about theory, they've probably adequately powered it. All of this is great. These are all good things for the work itself, for the content. Screw these sort of prestige-based judgments and these heuristics. I think scientists are wisening up to these kind of things, and they're not going to solely rely on that one Nature paper or that one science paper to make all of their decisions going forward. So that's my sort of little piece on that.
And I mean, I came down on the same side of this discussion, right? I was also more on the side of, fuck prestige. But at the same time, it is, man, we're kind of asking the people most vulnerable in the pyramid that is academia to do the risks by not playing the game. I mean, there was, I think Hoekstra and Vazier talked a little bit about this in Aspiring to Greater Intellectual Humility in Science, that it's the early career researchers who putting themselves at a potential disadvantage by being honest about the limitations of their work and not overhyping themselves. And it's the right thing to do. Yeah, I mean, it's the right thing to do, but it's so scary.
Yeah, it is. I've been thinking about this a lot recently as well. Like, since I made a decision to leave academia, but then, now I'm coming back. But when I made a decision to leave, I'm not as attached anymore. And so I feel a lot more comfortable being critical. Like, I don't care what people think anymore. And I have the security to do that because of my job, and I have that privilege, so I'm going to take it. But I am still, like, relatively precarious, right? I went to a conference and I brought up in music science the issues of universality, and I brought up how politics and science are inherently intertwined. Like Bill said, being neutral does not exist. So, I brought this up, and the other people were like, oh yes, I agree. Or not everybody, but some. And a lot of them were more established scholars. And sort of part of me was like, okay, great. Well, then why aren't you saying something? Like, why do I, the precariously employed
do
person,
something?
Yeah, why do I have to be the one to bring it up and to say things? Like, if you agree with me and you believe that things should be different, do something about it. Say something about it, and don't put that on the junior people.
Yeah, and I mean, there we're kind of back of the idea evolution versus revolution. When those people who just don't care about open science, who don't care if you have a registered report in your CV, they just want to see that Nature publication. If those people are out of the hiring positions, then suddenly you could do all this stuff with so much more security, right?
But at the same time, like, me speaking up has given me opportunities I didn't have before, because now I'm reaching those people who do agree, and it's making new connections. And then maybe those people will, through those communications, those relationships, can value things differently and can make a difference, right? Knowing that there are other people out there that agree with you makes it a lot easier to maybe speak up on a hiring committee, or as a reviewer, or in any position of power, to actually challenge the dominant discourse.
Yeah, finding the community that will support you in your endeavors is important. It's tough. You've got to put yourself out there. And initiatives fall flat. Sometimes it's a really good idea, but it's just you're too early, or like timing or whatever. The community just doesn't pick it up. But if you keep going and if you believe you're right, and you work towards it, like you believe you're doing something good, I should say, then hopefully you'll find the community behind that, and that will carry that forward. It's tough though. There's so many barriers to doing that, and it is generally the earlier career scientists, generally those who are in more precarious situations, who are having to sort of volunteer and put in their time and effort beyond what they're already doing to try and get these initiatives off the ground. And it's sad that science is in a state like this, unfortunately. But
at the same time, I'm not super surprised. Like, given where it comes from, I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Yep.
But arguably,
I don't know.
So the way I was told, the way I was taught what science is, right? It was very much this, like the Mertonian ideals, right? Of communalism. No, he straight up said communism. And like that we are working towards the truth, that we are not in it for our own prestige, that we are in it to further humanity as a whole, right? And then you kind of getting into this field thinking, hey, I like that, I want to do that, and academia is looking back at, oh wait, you believe that? But I mean, kind of, we were very depressing so far, I think.
Yeah, no, I think there's an optimism and a motivation here.
Yes,
actually, like people are doing these things, and there is a belief there, and people are recognizing that these things are broken and need to be changed and need to be improved, and there are people doing that. And I'm sure with good, well thought out ideas that are communicated to the scientific community, they will get picked up and you'll get traction. I think reproducibility is a great example of this. Like, it started out as a small group of early career researchers at Oxford, and now it's global across so many institutions and creating a lot of change in terms of improving the trainee experience for many institutions by giving them this research training and giving them community around science and research rigor. So there are silver linings. We have it. So
to link it to earlier, while primarily still working on this interpersonal level, right? Because the reproducibility, it's mostly about connecting with people that are around you, and kind of building those personal relationships and kind of pushing each other towards better science. Yeah,
I've got a cop-out answer to our evolution versus revolution discussion, which is local evolution at many places becomes a revolution. So start off with start off evolving your local network, and then you'll see as it carries through, and more people do it, it will be part of a revolution.
That's one for your Twitter bio. Yeah. Sarah, what is your look into the future?
I mean, overall, I think I'm optimistic. I mean, I see how much change can be made locally, like in my own work, in my relationships with people I work with, in my lab, how much has changed the past couple of years because we've intentionally thought about it, what we're doing and how we're going to do it, and then that ripples out because all of that work is going to touch all sorts of other people and they're going to go on to do different things. And so it's the conversations I've been having at conferences and online events and what I've been reading, it's all just very, very optimistic. I am in the revolution camp generally. I like to imagine the future. What can it look like in the future and how are we going to get there? And I like reading about different theories of change. I think it's really important. I'm finishing a book called Revolutionary Rehearsals in the Neoliberal Age, all about revolutions, why they failed and how we can do better the next time. So
affiliated Amazon link in the description. Affiliated Amazon link in the description.
Right? Oh yeah.
No, but all your recommendations, we will put those into the description.
Yes, those will be in the show notes.
Yes.
If I can just riff off that, I mean, we get these sort of revolution into have to be fiery, sort of war kind of, ideas, which is not true. We could have, well thought out, positively empowering revolutions. Those are possible. And sometimes it just so happens that I think the most optimistic people are the most critical because they're the ones that can see things things can be better. Because they're not willing to accept the status quo, they think things can be better and they can see it being better, they become the most critical, right? So that those two don't go they're not on the opposite sides of the spectrum. I think they're very much on the same side when it comes to this kind of stuff. So yeah, I feel like that's an optimistic view to have. I don't know if I'm sorry if I'm putting words in your mouth, Sarah, but I think that's motivating. That's inspiring,
I think it's a great place to wrap up the episode.
Yeah, I think so.
We've got almost an hour of recording here.
I don't know all the stuff I have to edit. Well,
hey, edit out this bit. Tell everyone where they can follow you, where they can find you. Do you want to start, Sarah?
Sure.
Where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Sarah_Sauvé. I am also on TikTok at Madame YYT MADOM. That's my burlesque stage name. I share what I read.
So cool.
So I'll be talking about open science. I'll be talking about what we read in book club. I read a lot, so that's where I share my readings.
You can find me on Twitter at Will Ngiam. So to spell my last name, it's Ngiam, in case people need that. And you can also find me on things like Slack, or I pop out in many various open science Slack workspaces. So let me know. You feel free to directly message me if you want to talk to me there.
Cool. And I'm mostly active on Twitter under Vornhagen JB. It's mostly stupid jokes.
We love this.
And reproducibility stuff. And most importantly, ReproducibiliTea.org, where you can find out how to start your own reproducibility journal club and start your own local evolution for global revolution.
Nice.
This is an auditory medium. You can clap.
I don't know, I like the clicks. Okay.
Yeah, they're nice. You listen to Reproducibility Season 2, Episode 2, Science Needs to Be Better. Your hosts this episode were William Ngiam, Sarah Sauvé, and Jan Vornhagen, who you can find on Twitter at Will_Ngiam, at Sarah_Sauvé, and at VornhagenJB respectively. This episode was produced by William Ngiam and edited by Jan Vornhagen. For more information on the podcast and how to start your own journal club, visit reproducibility.org. Thanks for listening.